we've got this thing all rigged up, ready for animation, and let's get into animating it. So I'm going to change up my workspace a little bit to have a couple more windows here. So first and foremost, we're going to change this to non-linear animation, and we're going to change this to the dope sheet, and then specifically to the action editor. We're going to make a idle animation, a walking animation, a attacking animation, and a hurting animation. And maybe I'll make another one if I come up with a fun idea. So let's start with the idle animation, simply because it is by far the easiest one. And we'll do that with starting up a little higher. We've got inverse kinematics for all of the legs here. So we literally only need to key whole character here, and then go to like 40 frames in or something like that, and move the whole thing down, keyframe again. And actually, as a matter of fact, let's add in another window here real quick and make that the timeline, and auto keying should be on. Then we'll select everything. Actually, we only really need to select this one, and then to 80 frames, and there we go. So now we've got a decent idle animation. Maybe it is actually dipping down a little too low, actually. Maybe that looks pretty good. And that's why you set up inverse kinematics, because it makes this entire process so much easier. Now, we need a little bit more detail in our animation than just that, but we're going to limit ourselves here to 80 frames in length, because that's how long this loop takes. And in that 80 frames, I'm thinking let's do something where this moves a little bit as well, so it feels a little more alive, right? And then at the very end it should move back up, and there's no real necessity to have this match up. So yeah, that feels a bit more alive. There's a little stutter at the end of the animation when it loops. That's just a blender playback, that's not actually in the animation, so that's fine. And then we'll get this. We've made a rig where it's easy to animate these fangs, so we can just every 20 frames loop that around, and we'll very easily create a movement in the fangs as well. And there we have a idle animation. There's a little something going on here which I don't particularly like, because those are disconnected. There's also something weird going on here. Hold on. It isn't the easiest thing to animate, because while there's no weird stretching going on, things needing to interlock means there's a certain amount of precision required, which is not necessarily my strongest point. So needed to fix up some of the rigging we did in the last video. Now let's show them as sticks, just because it shows the actual model a little bit better. I think this is pretty good. Like that little leg over there is a bit weird, but that really is the only thing that is doing anything wrong. So with how much of a headache this entire thing is going to be, that's fine. So we just push that down and we call that idle. Then the attacking animation, the visual effect for it is going to be done in Unity itself, but all we need to do for that is... Good question, what are we going to do for that actually? Let's keyframe the whole character, and then 20 frames move you down. Move you down a little. What happens if I rotate this one? It actually works remarkably well. And at the same time we can animate this one. Animate that on 30 frames actually, instead of 20, so that it keeps moving a little longer. Animate that up, so we have... Probably could stand to make that entire thing much faster, like twice as fast. And then maybe move you back, so we have a little bit of wiggling going on there. Move you back faster. If you've seen my 5 animation tip videos, just make things faster. They tend to look better. That being said, that's not the issue here. The issue here is one of weight and timing. And I think the issue will be resolved mostly through the fact that the body has to react as well. Let's see, that up and then down. We move you a little up and then rotate you further ever so slightly. And from there, this is going to need a looping idle animation as well. So this is actually just the attack enter animation. That's everything there is to it. 20 frames long. That works for me. Yeah, no, that's fine. Because then from there we can just use this exact same pose here. So we can just insert a keyframe for the whole character. Put that on frame 0. Seamlessly will go between those animations without any blending being needed. And from there we can just make a faster version of the movement we had for the normal idle animation. And we can make that one as long or short as we want, really. So let's make this one 90 frames and see what that feels like. This version needs a little rotation to it as well, I feel. It's a little too fast. Let's try making it 120 frames long. Okay, that's pretty good. It's a little stiff, I'll give you that. But we're going to be animating this part of it as well. And since we've got a total of 120 frames, if we move on every 30 frames like this, we'll be able to properly loop as well. I actually think that's still too fast. Let's remove these last two, and that then... yeah, that then makes the same timing as this, which is not great. Maybe the movement doesn't need to be slower, it just needs to be smaller, because that's quite a big movement. So what if we make this movement slightly smaller instead? I think that is a good alternative. And we can add a bit of variation to it, right? This one can be a little bit more to the left, and then this one can be slightly more to the right. Add a little liveliness to it as well. And then of course we can animate the fangs to do just something. Doesn't matter that much. We can just open them up a little bit, close them down a little, open them back up and close them. And I don't think the timing for this is going to look particularly great, but maybe... well, that's actually a little too far. That's going to clip through. And that's the attacking animation. Doesn't seem very attack-like, but the attack is going to come out from here. It's going to be like a force field shield around it. So this just loops a random amount of time, and then we move on to a exit animation. So we can push this down as well. And this one doesn't necessarily need to 100% match the last frame of the looping animation, because this one is going to blend in. It could be transitioned to at any given time during the previous animation, because there's some randomness to the length of that state of the attack. So we can simply get a pose that looks decent, use that as a reference for the whole character for the start, and then I want to put in another keyframe here for the, if I clear the transform, just like the normal default state of it, with the only difference being that the fangs don't clear their transform. And that's really all there is to the exit animation, I think, because it could be a little fast, admittedly. Because after that it's going to go back into its idle loop or its walking animation or whatever. So sometimes animations can be as easy and as simple as that. So that's attack. Now the hurt animation is going to be a little tricky. So let's actually start with the walking animation here. So we simply select every bone except this one, because we don't want to clear the transform on that one. We go back to our clear transform, our default state. And because our rigging was a little uncooperative, what we're going to do is for this one, we're going to set a keyframe for influence to being 0. So it doesn't use inverse kinematics. We're going to animate this with forward kinematics, meaning that there's going to be a lot more work here, but also a fair bit more control. Okay, this is the animation that scares me for having to make it. But let's get started with these two legs. As I explained in the last part, but maybe you haven't seen that, spiders tend to walk with pairs of legs that are on a diagonal, moving at the same time. So this leg and this leg should move at the same time, and then I think this and this, this and this and this, and the last two all should move in pairs. There's also the issue of the fact that how I modeled and rigged this. I can only really move these things in their local X rotation. But for an effective walking animation, you would also usually require a rotation in the global Z. I'm gonna try just making an animation with a up and down motion that doesn't include a forward motion, and hope that just moving the object forward in game in combination with the legs tapping up and down does the trick. I'm not sure that it will. So let's start off with this leg going up and then taking this leg going up as well. And we're actually going to be like unbending these quite a bit. Do mind the fact that I'm in local space. So I'm rotating these things around our local x-axis. Now what we're going to do is I'm just going to do all of these legs at the same time, and then I'll change their timings because they all need to make the same movements anyway, right? So if I make sure that this is an individual origins, I can just move all of these. Well, this one is facing the wrong way, so that's a little awkward. Upward on the 10 frame mark, and then the second segments are next. Some of these are facing 180 degrees the wrong direction, so while their axis still makes sense, their orientation doesn't. So we need to manually go over that. This is again, much like I said in the last video, which again, if you haven't seen that, I'll just reiterate here. If this was a character that I needed to animate a lot more and make a bunch more animations for, it would be worth now going back in and changing the roll for all of the bones that have this issue, so that the actual animation process becomes easier. But I'm like already 80% the way done animating this, and the only real animation that gets impacted by that is the one I'm making right now. So I'm not going to fix it, I'll just deal with it. Now I'll also make this a little slower, so it'll all happen over the course of 40 frames, which makes it a little easier to say the timing for this and this set is going to be shifted 10 frames to that side, and then the timings for these, which match, I believe, these. I'm not an insect, I know spiders aren't insects, but I'm not an insect expert, so maybe 5 frames to that side. Actually, let's go for 10 frames to that side. Okay, so now I've got everything selected that's part of the same group here, so we can... And I'll worry about making it properly loop in a moment. Just give me a moment here to get all the timings right. That seems to loop reasonably well. There's a little fuck up here, but I think if I just move this frame over to 120, that should resolve that. Okay, this loops. Okay, now, the actual movement of the body. First and foremost, I think it will help if we animate the back part of the body to move up and down. You see, because there's 8 legs, the usual like contact, down, up, passing pose structure of a walk cycle gets significantly complicated and really doesn't work all that well anymore. I'll give you one thing. It doesn't feel as janky as I thought it would. I just realized another issue as well that I'll let you think about what the issue is. Have you figured it out yet? Because this is where the feet land, and this over here is the lowest point of the body, meaning the body is going to clip through the fucking floor. The feet need to be lower down. which is not that difficult to do. Just, I wish I thought about it earlier. Because it's just a matter of getting the down position for every bone. Let's see, this is the up. The middle here is the down position. Okay, now that I'm doing this actually is starting to feel like the difference between the right side here and the left side. Like this is starting to feel like it's actually walking. So just doing that little bit of extra work, turns out that is highly worth it. And also because I now know that this actually looks a lot better, that is highly motivating. It works well enough for me. So let's say 56 frames long and push that down. I'll split this strip, say fuck off to both other sides because I can't be bothered to deal with any of that shit. Now let's go back over the other animations and check what the... yeah, I was afraid of something like that. First of all, these all need to be set back to influence being fully on. And then after I've done that, I need to go back into the walking animation and check if that's fucked up anything there. It shouldn't have, but very well could have. Need to be moved down a little. Tiny bit more. Actually, can I try to use that as just a copy paste? I can. That is fantastic because that means that everything is going to have the same amount of height, which is perfect because otherwise the feed would be blending up and down all the fucking time and we don't want that. Okay, that's fixed a lot of my issues. I was real nervous there for a moment. And for the very last animation, we'll do the hurt animation, and we probably want to have 3 variations of that. So we'll make one of them and then copy that over twice and modify to just change things up a little bit. The issue is usually with a hurt animation, I would do something like going like 10 frames this direction and just rotate the body. But that doesn't work that well, so maybe we'll need to do something else. Let's see, what does that look like? Actually, that might not be so bad. If we then also... is IK enabled for these? It is. So if we just... it's going to be a little iffy to get this working. What does that look like? That's actually not too bad. Get these lined up as well. Making it a little faster, probably not a bad idea. It can be a pretty quick animation, 5 frames, something like that. And then the entire body at 10 frames goes back to where it was at. So I think the movement could be a little bigger. So let's try and move the body back as well and rotate it just a tiny bit more and rotate this a tiny bit more as well. And in order to really sell the fact that it's getting like pushed back, what we're doing right now is we just more or less do a ping pong. So what I want to do is at like 8 frames, I'll select everything, copy over that keyframe, and this is going to go to like 15. Let's go to 9 frames actually. And just like extrapolate a little bit further from where the initial movement went, but much more subtle. So that way we have a quick movement, a little bit of hang time where it's not entirely stationary, it does need to be moving. So probably a good idea to like put the legs somewhere around there as well. And then let's move this to 20 to make its fall back down slower. So that's pretty much good enough for our herding animation. That works relatively well. And this is really where the IK comes in handy, right? Because all of these bones, they just do what they need to do when the body moves. So we can push that down and we'll call that herd 1. And then we'll Shift D to duplicate it, call that herd 2 and edit that action. And then all we need to edit is these two keyframes. So let's make one where we move a little towards that direction, and then we'll need to figure out a little bit of work for the legs as well to make them not glitch out too much. But now we have a slight variation where he leans into this direction, right? And as a matter of fact, I think it'll be nice if the lower body does a similar movement to give it, actually it could be quite a bit more to really give it the feeling that it, I'm not sure why, but I feel like maybe moving it up here a little bit will, it's not really getting too much weightiness to it. I don't think moving it is a good idea, but we can try. That's good enough. And then for herd 3, what we're going to do is, first and foremost, we're going to name it herd 3, not 4. And then we'll just edit this action to do the same thing pretty much, but the other direction. So this is going to bend over in that way. And then this is going to bend over in that way even more. I think at this point the movement itself is much more extreme on this one. It's not too bad actually. And we clearly need to figure out these legs a little bit, because this is not this is not going too well. So let's try to figure out these legs a little. Give them a little bit more room to move, maybe. Actually, we want them to move inward, is I think what I'm seeing here, and don't move them up. So when we move them inward, eventually this one does not. Okay, hopefully for this one it'll work. It does. And then at this frame, we'll see if we can fix up the legs even more. There's not a lot of fixing that needs to be done. This all works out well enough. And for a quick herding animation, that is good enough. So then when we go to export, first and foremost, I want to save. But then when we go to export, make sure that none of these actions are highlighted. Otherwise, that'll be the only animation that actually gets exported. So we've got all of these separate actions now. We can go to File, Export, FBX. And here we have the folder that we're going to export into, which is all fine. That's perfectly valid. And we actually want to give these things a proper name. So let's call this skeleton armature, or spider armature rather. And this will be spider mesh. Then we'll turn off the sun from being visible, because now we can say include only the visible objects. So now it'll only include things in the FBX which are visible in our outliner. You could also say only selected objects. That works perfectly fine as well. Or you could put them all into a collection and only export the active collection. There's a lot of ways to do this, but things like the light that I haven't deleted and like the high poly version that might still be in the Blender project that you want to have for reference purposes or for future use, you don't need those in the FBX. Then geometry we can ignore. For the armature, we're going to only use the deform bones and not add any leaf bones. And we want to only export the NLA strips, not the actions. It's a little annoying because to me it makes sense that it would be the other way around. But the strips are the actual blocks that we see here that we've named. The actions are the tracks themselves. So if you're making animations and you're blending between two animations or something like that, if you export the actions, it'll export the blended version. So it's a useful thing to have, but generally this is the way in my workflow how I animate things. So I just export the NLA strips and then we'll export this as the spider FBX. Then in your engine of choice, in my case right now that will be Unity, we just drag it in and we can see we have a spider here. And in there we have all of the individual animations. So this is our idle animation, our attack enter animation, attack loop, and so on and so forth. the walking animation. We've got our one single material that we can apply those texture maps to that we've made in a previous video, and from here on you can start coding everything you want for this specific enemy, which will not be part of the series. This is specifically about creating the character and modeling and everything like that. So if you've enjoyed this video or this entire mini-series, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content much like this. And if you want to support both this channel and the ongoing development of this video game, there's a link down below in the description to my Patreon, where you can subscribe for any tier you want. If you go for the Cave Dweller tier, I believe, you get access to all of the project files for the tutorials that I make. So it's a very good value, well worth your time. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page.